I was 7 years old when I was told, "You can't play with us." It was on the playground at school, and there came to me a sharp realization that what I had to give was not always what the world wanted. I was 9 years old when I was told, "No girls allowed." The identity I was so confident in was shattered. Why couldn't I just fit in to what people wanted from me? I was 12 years old when I was told, "You must be dumb because you don't look like us." There was no more playground. I just slowly learned that this was how the world worked.
The playground was home to so many eye-opening realizations for the both of us. For me, it was where I realized I didn't quite fit society's definition of girlhood, and that different wasn't really tolerated. You see, I was chased across the blacktop until I could barely breathe because I chose kickball with the guys over arts and crafts with the girls, because my hair was too curly and my skin too dark. I didn't fit the perfect mold of society's perfect child, and that the playground was where other kids made sure I knew. Katie and I have lived our lives on a seesaw, either trying to find our footing in a world that rejects the magical blending of identities, or being forced into the ground for being too much. Now, we all live in a world full of assumptions. Sometimes these assumptions are fairly harmless. For example, because Katie and I come from Asian families, you might assume we're going to school for computer science or engineering or medicine. The punchline, we're going to school for just that.
However, a lot of these times, these assumptions can also be incredibly damaging. For example, I say I'm half Asian. The usual question, Chinese, Japanese, or Korean. Now, you've given me 3 options to choose from, which, admittedly, is better than just putting me into one of these categories. But the problem is, my answer is still none of the above. My mom comes from Hong Kong, and that is how my family identifies. Within the assumptions we make is a lack of acknowledgement of various dialects, regions, and cultures. Are you from Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, Mongolia, Kazakhstan? Doesn't matter. You're Chinese anyways. But I'm not. We're not. I grew up in a world where my multiracial identity simply didn't exist to others. There's those little boxes on the questionnaire that force you to pick your language, your culture, your identity. What happens when you don't have a box? All this comes down to one simple question. What if I'm just not enough? I'm half of one thing and half of another. What if that makes me too little of either? What if, at the end of the day, I'm nothing? Now I'm going to ask you all a seemingly simple question. What do you see when you look at yourself in the mirror? Take a moment to think about that.
For me, when I look in the mirror, I struggle to see my womanhood, especially within my South Asian identity. In fact, it's what pushed me to reject societal gender norms and come out as non-binary. When I look in the mirror, I see a square peg in a round hole. Someone that doesn't quite check the boxes society has defined their perfect Indian woman around. One of these boxes is my curly hair. It was a major point of contention throughout my childhood, and it was pretty obvious I didn't have hair like any of my friends. So my solution? 5 hours in the salon chair every 6 months, using relaxers to turn these curls into pin-straight strands. I'm never doing that one again. And this wasn't the only box. My dark skin, my broad shoulders, my hyperpigmentation. The mirror sent a clear message. I was too much. Katie, what do you see in the mirror?
Bear with me when I say this. I'm going to sound a little bit crazy, but don't I always? But frankly, I see nothing. I've looked at myself in the mirror countless times. We all have. My entire life, I've been told that I look like my mom, my dad, my brother. The person I see reflected back at me doesn't, though. Some classmates have told me, "You look white." I look in the mirror, I can't see it. Others have told me, "You look Asian." I look in the mirror, and I definitely can't see that. And my friends tell me that they can 100% tell that I'm Asian. But honestly, I really, really cannot see that. I've spent so long trying so hard to see in the mirror what the world sees in me that I've lost myself. I look now, and I see no one. I'm nothing. I'm too little.
So where does this sense of identity, or lack thereof, come from? What are we introduced to at such a young age that shapes how we see the world and ourselves? The answer, media.
I'd like to get your thoughts on representation in media. What % of some of the top Netflix actors and directors of 2024 do you think were mixed? Raise your hands. 15%? 12%? 10%? Close. A meager 5.4% of these stars were mixed, compared to the 12.5% of Americans who identify as multiracial.
Now, I'd like to direct you to the smaller number on the screen. If you can't see it, here it is. 1.7 of all the actors and directors in the past year's biggest movies and TV shows were queer. That's it. None of them were trans. Media was our gateway to liberation from the mirror. I'd seen a couple of queer people of color on TV shows and movies, but I'd yet to see a South Indian, non-binary, queer character that I could perfectly relate to. Yes, I know it's crazy to expect that every intersectionality of every single identity be perfectly represented in media, but I still felt like a fish out of water, so my search continued. That's when I took AP English Language in my junior year. Our final was an independent research essay on a book of our choice. So after a little bit of digging, I settled on one I thought I'd enjoy. The book I chose, Zami, A New Spelling of My Name by Audre Lorde. Zami was less about representation for me. The main character identifies as a Black, lesbian, woman poet. I don't identify with any of those terms. In fact, what I did connect with was Audre Lorde's journey to find a community that embraced her for all of her. And there it was. This was the very journey I was on, looking for a community that didn't embrace me for just my South Indian identity, just my queerness, just my trans identity, but for me. Audre Lorde is on a similar journey, looking for a community where as a Black lesbian, she didn't have to singularly exist as Black or gay, but as just Audre Lorde. I'd like to share a quote that snapped me out of this perfect quest for a perfect community. Once I accepted my position as different from the larger society, or any single sub-society, Black or gay, I felt I didn't have to try so hard. To be accepted, to be femme, to be straight, to look straight, to be nice, to look proper, to be liked, to be loved, to be approved. What I didn't realize was how much harder I had to try, merely to stay alive, rather to stay human. How much stronger a person I became in that trying. I cried when I finished Zami. There wasn't anything particularly heartbreaking about the book, but I sobbed when I neared the end. It was so freeing, so liberating to realize I was no longer lost, no longer stuck in the woods trying to find a place to call home. Zami showed me I was home.
Just like Devyn, I've always searched for a piece of me in the stories I read. There's a sense of familiarity that accompanies seeing someone like you in the world. I can name very few pop culture figures who, like me, identify as Asian. But even then, my so-called representation usually ended up forcing themselves into one of their many little boxes. Through Zami, Devyn found an idea that felt like home to them. Over the past 5 years, I've read over 45,000 pages of books, and I've watched an obscene number of minutes of television. Still, I didn't find the sense of home. Seeing this lack of myself on the screen, I decided to look more into the issue, find representation in more niche areas, and write about it. When I joined the St. Francis newspaper, The Lancer, I was able to focus my efforts on the entertainment industry. One of my favorite articles that I've ever written was one on Michelle Yeoh winning her Golden Globe for Everything Everywhere All at Once. When I listened to her interviews, the one thing that stuck out to me the most was her voice. She has a Cantonese accent that is so deeply familiar to me that it gave me that sense of kinship and belonging. She talked about not fitting in, not seeing people like her when she moved to Hollywood, and not seeing representation for her full identity, an aging Malaysian Cantonese woman, on the screen. I understood her words.
So just like the intersectionality of identities in Zami was a calling card to me, the struggle of not being represented was a calling card to Katie. You see, we consume media like our lives depend on it. And whether it be in books, interviews, TV shows, we find people from completely different stories that yet speak to us. What does it mean to be too much? To be trans, Indian, dark-skinned, curly-haired, queer, and non-binary, all at once?
What does it mean to be the girl on the playground who doesn't quite fit into one group, but also doesn't quite fit into the other? Michelle Yeoh taught me something while I was writing that article. You might not be on that screen, but in a way, you are. The world is filled with people who don't know who they are, and media certainly doesn't help with that. But by recognizing that there are so many people who don't fit into the little boxes on the questionnaire, who are stuck on the ground on the seesaw, or struggling in the air, maybe that's how we find ourselves. By accepting that not knowing your identity may, in and of itself, be an identity. I'd like to end with a quote I found while reading my favorite book. You are American, Japanese, Korean, and by being all of those things, you are not truly any of those things. You consider yourself a citizen of the world. Devyn found freedom in the realization that you can be everything everywhere all at once. Meanwhile, I found home in the knowledge that I can be nothing and that can still be enough.
So let's go back to that seesaw. We've all grown up on it. And hey, for some people, it might just be the perfect fit. But for some of us, like Katie and I, it's not. And that's where media comes in. Yes, media is just as guilty of trapping you in that little sect of the playground. But whether it's reading a book or joining a newspaper, it can pull you right off. And that's when everything clicks. You look around and you see the whole playground, the slides, the jungle gym, the monkey bars. You realize there's more to the world and yourself than that little seesaw.
There has to come a day when you look in the mirror and stop trying to see what the world sees in you. You have to be able to look at yourself and realize that this is what you've been given, this is who you are, and that is enough.
And you're not just going to realize this one day. It's going to take time and effort and learning to love yourself again, like you did before you entered that playground.
Thank you.